It started on a Monday morning like any other. My name is David Miller. I'm 39 years old and I've worked as a construction project manager in Phoenix, Arizona for nearly 12 years. My days were long, my responsibilities endless, managing teams, coordinating materials, keeping schedules tight. I prided myself on handling pressure, but for the past few months, I'd been feeling something I couldn't ignore. A crushing fatigue, constant night sweats, and a strange, persistent lump on the side of my neck. I kept brushing it off. Stress, I told myself. Maybe a minor infection. I couldn't afford to be sick. I had deadlines to hit, subcontractors to manage, and a new residential complex going up in Mesa that was already behind schedule. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. On the insistence of my younger sister, she's a nurse, I finally went in for a checkup. Just rule things out, she said. The doctor was professional but concerned. He ordered a biopsy and a series of scans. I nodded, pretending it was all routine. I didn't tell anyone at work. Not yet. The results came back on a Thursday afternoon. I sat alone in the cold, sterile office, staring at the framed diplomas on the wall while the oncologist walked in, holding a folder. He didn't sit down right away. That's when I knew. "David, you have lymphoma," he said. "Non-Hodgkin's, but it's treatable. We caught it early." I heard the words, but my brain wouldn't process them. I stared at the floor, then at his mouth, trying to catch up. Treatable. Early. Cancer. It was like being underwater, hearing things through glass. He explained the treatment plan, outlined next steps. I nodded and asked questions I wouldn't remember later. I drove home in silence. No radio. No calls. Just the dry Arizona sun glaring through the windshield. My head was full, my chest tight. I hadn't told anyone yet. Not even my girlfriend, not my boss. I thought maybe I'd give it a few days, but I wouldn't get the chance. I showed up to work the next morning, trying to act like everything was normal. It wasn't. My body felt heavier, my mind scattered, but I told myself I just needed to power through. I figured I'd wait until after the weekend to tell my supervisor about the diagnosis, maybe even start making arrangements for a temporary leave. I wasn't ready for the looks, the questions, the change in how people would see me. I had barely logged into my computer when I got the email, "Please come to HR at 9:15. No subject, no context, just a time. My stomach dropped. I walked down the hallway trying to stay calm. I passed the break room, nodded at a few co-workers. No one knew. They smiled like everything was fine. The HR office was cold, the kind of cold that feels deliberate. Stephanie, the HR manager, was already there, sitting behind her desk. Next to her was a man I didn't recognize, probably legal counsel. Neither smiled. "Have a seat, David," Stephanie said, gesturing to the chair in front of her desk. Her voice was polite but distant. She launched into a rehearsed explanation about departmental restructuring, budgetary realignments, and strategic shifts. I didn't understand at first. I blinked, confused. "Wait, are you saying I'm being let go?" There was a pause. She nodded. "This wasn't an easy decision," she said. "But effective today, your position is being eliminated." I didn't say anything for a long time. My mouth went dry. I thought about the biopsy, the treatment, the oncologist's voice. I thought about how I'd planned to talk to my boss after lunch. "Why me?" I finally asked. They both looked down at the file on the desk. Stephanie gave a vague answer about cost structures. I wasn't angry yet, I was stunned. I signed a few documents they placed in front of me, barely reading. One of them was labeled Severance Agreement. They handed me a folder. A security guard escorted me to my car. I hadn't even packed my things. As I sat in the driver's seat, I finally let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. I had cancer, and I had just been fired. I sat in my living room that night, with the severance packet spread across the coffee table, like the remains of some failed negotiation with fate. The house was silent. I hadn't told anyone yet, not my sister, not my girlfriend, not even my closest friend Mike. I needed time to understand what had just happened. Cancer was enough, but now, no job, no insurance through the company. I stared at the ceiling, then back at the thick stack of papers in front of me. Most of it was legal language, non-disclosure clauses, general releases, waiver of claims. My eyes scanned the lines without really processing them until something caught me. It was a section referencing voluntary separation, followed by a clause excluding any acknowledgement of pending medical leave. That was strange. I hadn't resigned, They'd called it restructuring, and I hadn't mentioned anything about medical leave yet. That word stuck with me. Leave. I picked up my phone and searched for it. Family and Medical Leave Act. I didn't know much about it, but I'd heard of it in passing over the years, something about job protection during serious medical issues. As I read through the federal guidelines, my pulse picked up. Employees were guaranteed up to 12 weeks of unpaid leave for serious health conditions. I had worked full-time for over a decade. I met every eligibility requirement. The more I read, the more something didn't sit right. They fired me the day after my diagnosis. They didn't give me a chance to disclose it. And the severance document went out of its way to avoid any reference to medical issues. I went back to the clause. It wasn't just poorly worded. It looked intentional, like they were trying to preempt something they knew could bite them. I didn't feel powerful. I felt sick, betrayed, exhausted. But somewhere beneath all of that, something else stirred, something quieter, sharper, a flicker of defiance. I put the papers back into the envelope, grabbed a legal pad from the drawer and wrote one word at the top: document everything. The following week moved in slow motion. My days were filled with doctor's appointments, tests, and second opinions. I started chemo early. Aggressive treatment, the oncologist said. I kept it quiet. Only my sister knew. I told my girlfriend I needed time to think, which wasn't a lie, but I didn't mention the firing. I wasn't ready to say it out loud. At night, when the house was dark and I couldn't sleep from the steroids and the nausea, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open, digging into labor laws like a man possessed. I read everything: official government websites, legal blogs, employment rights forums. I searched keywords like wrongful termination after diagnosis, FMLA violation, fired after cancer. The stories I found were brutal. People like me. Some won lawsuits, others never saw justice. But a pattern emerged. Companies often got rid of employees quietly, just before they could apply for medical leave. It was cheaper that way. Less paperwork. No awkward accommodations. Most people didn't fight back. They were too sick, too scared, or too tired. I understood that now in a way I never had before. But I also learned something else. Timing mattered. If I could prove they had knowledge, or even suspicion, of my medical condition before the termination, I might have a case. I opened my work inbox, which I still had access to via my personal phone. Maybe someone had slipped. Maybe there was a record. I started with my last few weeks of emails. I found one I sent to my supervisor, asking to leave early for some tests I'd rather explain in person. Another confirming an appointment. Then one reply from him that said, "Let's discuss this Monday. I'd like to avoid any HR complications." That one made me stop. Avoid HR complications. The pieces were starting to form a picture. I wasn't sure how to frame it yet, but I wasn't imagining things. They didn't just cut me to save money. They cut me to avoid responsibility. I bookmarked everything, took screenshots, forwarded emails to a private folder. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing, not even my sister. This fight would be silent, for now. I spent the next few days combing through every digital breadcrumb I had. My phone was full of calendar reminders for doctor visits, lab work, and consultations. Each one had been added while I was still employed. I had email confirmations from the hospital, even a scanned note from my primary care physician recommending time off for additional tests. But it was a single email that made my heart stop. It was from my direct supervisor, Tom, dated 4 days before my termination. The subject line read, "Let's talk about David." It had been forwarded to HR. The body of the message was short. "He's been out a lot lately. Something medical. We should move quickly before it turns into a situation." There it was. They knew. They didn't even wait for me to explain. They preempted my diagnosis with a dismissal, trying to stay one step ahead of federal protections. It was cold, clinical, like removing a defective part from a machine. I forwarded the email to my personal account and saved it as a PDF. Then I printed it out and stared at it on the kitchen table. It felt surreal, like looking at someone else's life. I started pulling together a timeline, every doctor visit, every email, every message to my supervisor. I logged the dates, attached supporting documents, and labeled it all neatly. When I called a local employment attorney the next morning, I already had a folder ready. Her name was Marissa, and from the moment she heard my story, her tone shifted. "This is classic FMLA interference," she said. "They didn't just fire you, they tried to erase liability." I dropped the envelope off at her office that afternoon. She told me not to worry about payment up front. "We take cases like this on contingency," she said. As I left her office, I felt the weight of something lifting. Not the illness, not the exhaustion, but something deeper, a shift. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't just reacting to what had been done to me. I was taking control. Marissa filed the complaint 2 weeks later. It was quiet. No media, no press. Just a thick envelope sent by certified mail to the company's legal department. Inside, allegations of wrongful termination, FMLA interference, and retaliatory dismissal. The evidence spoke for itself. Emails, timelines, medical documentation, every piece of it organized with surgical precision. I didn't tell anyone at first, not even my girlfriend, who was starting to ask why I wasn't going back to work. I just said, "I'm taking some time." That was enough. For now. About a week after the complaint was filed, I got a call from Marissa. "They responded," she said. "They're surprised. Clearly didn't expect you to push back." Of course they didn't. Most people in my situation wouldn't. They probably assumed I'd be too busy fighting cancer to fight them too. Their response was full of denial, standard legal posturing. They claimed the termination was part of a long-planned workforce reduction. But their own emails told a different story. They had moved quickly, precisely after signs of my illness became known. They even timed the severance package to dissuade me from speaking out. A few days later, they offered a settlement. Marissa read it to me over the phone. "It's not nothing," she said, "but it's insulting. They want this to go away quietly." I told her no. "Good," she replied. "We're just getting started." From that point forward, every move became deliberate. Depositions were scheduled. My former co-workers were interviewed under oath. HR managers stumbled over dates. Timelines didn't add up. One even admitted she had seen Tom's email before I was called into her office. The tension in those weeks was strange. I was still going through chemo, still weak, still losing weight, but emotionally something was growing back inside me. A sense of dignity, maybe, or rage. I'm not sure where one ended and the other began. Marissa kept me updated. The company was getting nervous. "They're circling the wagons," she said, "but they can't plug the leaks." I had become a problem they couldn't quietly erase, and they were finally starting to realize it. It took almost 5 months, but the walls finally cracked. The company's attorneys reached out again, this time with a tone that was different, less defensive, less arrogant. They requested mediation, off the record, confidential. Marissa called me right after she got the notice. "They're folding," she said. "They want out." The mediation took place in a neutral office building across town. Plain carpet, bottled water, quiet hallways. I didn't even see the other side, just sat with Marissa in a room while a mediator went back and forth like a human message board. Their first number was low. Not insulting, but not serious either. I didn't flinch. "They're testing you," Marissa whispered. "Don't blink." The second offer was better. The third, even more. By late afternoon, the mediator returned with a folder. Inside was a figure that made me sit back in my chair. High 6 figures. No admission of wrongdoing, of course. No apology. But the terms were clear. Settlement in full, all legal fees covered, NDA optional. Marissa looked at me and raised an eyebrow. "Your call." I stared at the page. I thought about the chemo, the long nights alone in my kitchen, the look on my HR manager's face when she slid that termination letter across the desk. "I want one condition," I said. We added a clause, a donation from the company to a local cancer support network, in my name. Nothing dramatic, just a silent acknowledgement. They agreed. I signed the papers with a calm I didn't expect. There was no celebration, no cheers, just quiet. Afterward, I walked out into the Arizona heat. The sky was sharp and cloudless. I sat in my car for a while with the AC humming, the envelope in my lap. I didn't feel like I'd won the lottery. I didn't feel like I'd beaten anyone. But I had protected my dignity. I had held the line, and they paid to make me go away. Only I wasn't going anywhere. Word got out slowly. Not the lawsuit. Those details were sealed tight. But people in my industry talk. A few former co-workers reached out. One texted, "Heard you landed on your feet. Glad you're okay, man." Another sent a vague message about how things were handled and how others had noticed. Then the email started. A woman from a site I managed 2 years prior wrote to say she'd been pushed out after requesting maternity leave. A former electrician on one of my crews said he was let go after asking for time off for back surgery. Their stories were eerily familiar. Sudden terminations, vague reasons, no support, always quiet, always efficient. I started keeping track. Not officially, just names, dates, summaries. A pattern emerged. It wasn't just me. It was systemic, predictable, and almost always unchallenged. One night, sitting at the same kitchen table where I'd once sorted through my own severance papers, I stared at a blank notepad. The money I received was more than I'd ever expected. Enough to live off, sure, but also enough to do something. Something that could outlast my story. That's when I decided. I met with Marissa again. We talked logistics, liabilities, structure. Then I called my sister, explained everything, and asked if she'd help part-time. She said yes before I even finished the sentence. Within 2 months, we launched a non-profit. It started small, a clean website, a free hotline, a few downloadable resources. We called it WorkShield, a place where people could learn about their rights, share their stories, and get connected to real legal support. The first week, we had 5 inquiries, then a dozen. By the end of the month, we had over 60 emails from people across the country. Some were scared, some were angry, some were just lost. But all of them had one thing in common. They'd been silenced, just like I had been. And now, for the first time, they were being heard. We moved into a small office near downtown Phoenix, just a 2-room space with second-hand furniture and a lot of natural light. My sister helped set up intake forms. Marissa trained 2 law students to assist with screenings. I worked the phones most mornings, listening more than talking. The stories that came in were relentless. A forklift operator fired after disclosing he had multiple sclerosis. A single mother let go 2 weeks after a breast cancer diagnosis. A warehouse worker terminated the same day he told his supervisor about needing dialysis. Each story reopened a piece of my own, but this time I didn't feel helpless. We expanded quickly. With part of the settlement money, I funded a legal referral network for wrongful termination cases involving serious health conditions. We built partnerships with counseling centers, disability advocates, even a few labor unions. We weren't just helping people fight back, we were helping them rebuild. One woman, Stephanie, had been fired from a call center after requesting time off for surgery. We helped her file a complaint. 6 months later, she won her case and used part of her compensation to go back to school. She emailed me a photo of her graduation cap with "WorkShield helped me rise" written inside. I saved it. We started offering workshops. I began speaking. Small groups at first, then conferences, even a radio interview. I told my story with honesty. No drama. Just facts. Just truth. People listened. Some came forward. Others just nodded silently, finally understanding that what happened to them wasn't their fault. That silence didn't have to be the end of their story. I never wanted attention. I still don't. But I see now that what happened to me had a purpose I couldn't see at the time. What they meant to erase became the foundation of something permanent. And every time someone calls our number, every time I hear another story begin with, "I don't know if this is legal, but," I remember how it felt to sit alone with those papers in my hands. And I answer with certainty, "You're not alone anymore." I visited the old job site one morning, months after the foundation was up and running. The subdivision we'd been building, the one in Mesa, was finally complete. Rows of beige stucco homes stood in silence under the Arizona sun. I parked on the curb and stepped out, wearing a button-down and jeans, no hard hat this time, just me. I walked the sidewalk slowly, past the house that had been Phase 1, the model home we'd poured our energy into. I remembered arguments over drainage, the rush to meet deadlines, the crews working through dust storms. I remembered the pride and the betrayal. No one recognized me now. The contractor on duty waved politely, assuming I was a potential buyer. I nodded back and kept walking. I wasn't there to confront anyone. That part of me was done. Back in my car, I looked at the folder on the passenger seat. Inside were plans for our newest initiative, an outreach program for rural workers, many of whom have no access to legal help or know their rights. We'd already partnered with 2 health clinics. I was heading to a meeting about expanding. For years, I thought my value was tied to what I could build with my hands, what I could manage on a site. what I could prove through productivity. But this was different. This was something built in silence, out of pain, shaped by resilience. They thought they'd gotten rid of me to protect the company. They thought I'd disappear, stay quiet, maybe even give up. But they never knew who they were dealing with. They didn't see the fighter beneath the calm. They didn't see the organizer behind the quiet stare across that HR desk. They didn't know that the man they let go would use every broken piece they handed him to build something stronger than they ever imagined. And they definitely didn't expect that I'd help hundreds of others find their voice in the process. I rolled down the window, took one last look at the site, and drove away. Not angry, not bitter, just free.